Hi, my name is Evan Schulte. I am a social studies teacher here at Clear Creek Amana High School and a grad student at Morningside College. Thank you for joining me today as I discuss then the results of my research paper. The title of my paper was The Flipped Classroom: Can Learning Outside the Class Improve High School Students' Learning Inside the Classroom? The issue that really drove my research is around student engagement, and this is something that we've seen declining in recent years. Yazzie Mintz conducted a study in 2006 of over 80,000 high school students, and over 50% of them reported being bored daily at school. And this, unfortunately, is something that I've seen increase in my classroom over the years. As students, with technology improving, their priorities and their attention have really shifted, and I was struggling to find ways to keep them engaged in my classroom on a regular basis. And this lack of student engagement can have really huge effects in student learning and achievement. As we see in Wild's study conducted of international tests, we see America falling behind in math, reading, science, and even 21st century skills in compared to their international competitors. My research project provided me an opportunity to dive into student engagement and really to look for ways to improve student engagement. And as I was researching ways to improve student engagement, I came across what is known as flipped learning. And so let me start by telling you what flipped learning is. As defined by Harris and Jones in 2015, it reverses the classroom structure and students learn basic concepts. Typically this is through like pre-recorded lectures outside of class, and then they use class time to engage in practices to help them improve their understanding of that material. It provides opportunities for more active learning, and so we'll see group discussions, simulations, activities will fill up the daily class time where it used to be controlled by lecture. And it also provides opportunities for students and teachers to interact on a more one-to-one basis because the teacher is not lecturing to whole group instruction, and they can get around to each individual student or work with small groups throughout the class period. Past research into flipped learning has had some mixed results. Successes of flipped learning have been shown at the post-secondary level. We see this in the medical fields with pharmacy and nursing students having the greatest impact or success of flipped learning here. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, as flipped learning has not been shown across the board to work in every situation, and the fact that these results have not been reproducible shows that more research into the study needs to be done. Is it something that's consistent, or what's changing between one study and the next to say why one is successful and one is not? The gap I discovered while researching this is most of the studies that are done at that collegiate level, and so I was curious to find out, would flipped learning work at high school instead of just the college level? The purpose of this study was just that, to look into flipped learning to see if it would work with high school students and to what degree of success it might have. So it was my belief that participants' scores would be higher on summative assessments for those students who engaged in flipped learning than those who spent class time listening to live lecture. As we get into describe our study, let me first talk to you about the participants. I have 3 sections of American history that I teach, and in order to create an experimental and control group, what I did is I found 2 class periods that were similar size, and you can see that 17 students in each class. And then I flipped a coin. I labeled one class heads and one class tails, and I flipped a coin, and the one that came up ultimately became my experimental group. These students range from age 16 to 17, as they're all juniors in American history. And 95% of participants were then going to be Caucasian. The materials used, we have our textbook that kind of guided the units of study that we went through. And we covered chapters 5, 6, and 7 out of the Americans' Reconstruction to the 21st century. Chromebooks, our school invested in Chromebooks in 2015, and so every student in our school has a Chromebook that they use. And then, of course, I use Screencast-O-Matic to help me then create and record lectures for students to watch outside of class. And so the procedures, we have these screencasts, as I mentioned, that I would tape and record for students, and I would post them to the website called Edpuzzle. Edpuzzle allows me to not only upload the video of my lectures, but also then embed questions into those lectures where it stops the video and the kids have to answer said question before they can move on to finish. Edpuzzle will also then be used to track to see what students watched the video and how much time they spent watching the video as well. And students were required to watch these pre-recorded lectures before coming to class, and so they're ready to dive into some of the activities and simulations that we did. Class times then, instead of covering a normal lecture, what would happen is I would spend the first 5 to 10 minutes reviewing the day's lesson, things that they had watched in the screencast prior to coming to class. Sometimes I would use the responses to Edpuzzle to guide that review. Other times I would pose questions or have them answer questions in groups, and that was usually 5 to 10 minutes, and the rest of the class time was then spent in more active learning, or so the process was. Going through activities and simulations, working with small groups or having whole group discussion, and really diving into some primary sources to deepen their knowledge of the content that we were covering. The measures that I took for this study, each test or each unit was then assessed through a summative assessment of multiple choice questions. These questions were created based off of the lectures and the textbook that we used. Although there was no standardized testing that was done, all the exams were aligned to the Iowa Social Studies core standards. The data analysis, we had a 9-week study, and then I used the sample t-test to compare the results of both groups. And so let's take a look at those results here. Again, as I said, I thought students that were exposed to the flipped learning environment will produce higher scores on course material than those who learned in a traditional setting, and that was confirmed through the 3 tests that were done. As we look at exam number 5, here's the one where we see there wasn't much of a difference between the control and the experimental group, but as we get into exam 6 and 7, our p-value drops below that 0.05, which was then going to be our indicator to say that flipped learning was successful. As we take a look at the mean and the standard deviation here, again, the mean was not very great in chapter 5, but with chapter 6 we see a 20% difference in the mean score between the flipped and the traditional, and then in chapter 7 we see a 12% increase, 12% increase, or it was 12% higher for the experimental group. All right, let's take a look at some of these implications. With flipped learning, we might see that student achievement is then going to increase and improve. If you remember looking at the results, exam number 5, there was no difference between the 2 groups. So it is possible that it's going to take a while for students to adjust to flipped learning. As in exam 6 and 7, we saw that the flipped classroom outperformed the traditional learning style here. A change in classroom layout. This might be really important if we're going to have a more active classroom. Changing the way your classroom looks would also then be important, as we see teachers would get rid of the traditional rows of desks and perhaps look to get it into some more collaborative space as well. Professional development is another area that teachers are going to have to be addressed, or schools will have to address, as this being a new learning style for kids. It's also going to be different for teachers as well, as there's going to be the role of facilitator is really going to be key here. As you're facilitating the knowledge, you've already done some of the teaching before kids come to school, and so now is the opportunity with them in your classroom to help them dive deeper and to understand their learning of the material. And then finally, the last implication could be technology. As we're talking about watching pre-recorded lectures prior to coming class, which means kids need to have the ability to watch those things, and teachers need to have the technology and the tools available to them so they can record those lectures and get that information out to kids. Limitations of this study. A limited sample size. As you saw, there were only 34 participants in the study, 17 in each side, in each class. And this was kind of exacerbated by the fact that over the course of this 9-week study, there were 4 students that ended up being removed from the study. In the control group, there were 2 kids that moved out of the district, and so they were removed. And then in the experimental group, they also lost 2 students, but this was due to not watching the pre-recorded lectures. As I mentioned before, that website Edpuzzle not only poses questions, but it tracks students and shows who watched the video and for how much. And there were 2 students that continually didn't watch the videos and didn't do the work in, and so their results were thrown out as they didn't really participate in the study. The duration of the study. This one went for 9 weeks and it covered 3 chapters. That might not be enough time. As I mentioned before, it might take a while for kids to really adjust to this new style of learning and to take some of that ownership and responsibility outside the classroom to prepare themselves for inside the class work. And so 9 weeks might not have been enough time to really make that happen. And then the final limitation that I saw was a lack of a pretest. Due to the short window to get this this research project done, I failed to do a pretest to see that the classes really were similar in academic achievement. We saw that the accommodations and the special ed requirements were the same of each, and they had the same size, and we had the same amount of male and female participants. But this one might not be as severe as maybe it possibly seems. If you remember that exam number 5, where we're just kind of learning the beginning of flipped learning, showed that there wasn't a difference academically between the 2 groups. All right, recommendations for the future. We want to address the size, and so it'd be imperative for future researchers to increase the amount of students that are in there so you get a true sample size of a population of high school students to see if they are able to then thrive in a flipped environment. Increase the duration of the testing, and then of course to have that pre-test to start an experiment off to make sure those groups really truly were the same. Future research should also then look into the grade level. I did this experiment with 11th grade students, and I wonder, maybe it's different classes or different ages of kids, at what level is flipped learning successful? Could it go down to the middle school? Another recommendation would be to change the grading scale. For objectivity, I used simple multiple choice test questions here, and perhaps standard-based grading might be the better option here, as you're giving kids an opportunity to show what they know. That might not be the best through multiple choice. If we're creating this new environment in which kids are learning, maybe we should then adjust how kids are being assessed as well to really judge their depth of knowledge that they've acquired. And then, of course, for schools, any school district looking to implement flipped learning, I think they'd want to invest quite a bit of time and money into professional development to make sure teachers are ready to tackle this undertaking of flipped learning, and that they're truly doing something different with their class time in those activities and simulations to further students' knowledge. I think schools will want to invest in different furniture, some flexible seating, some large tables to then facilitate group work would be imperative if we're going to then have kids working together, which is really a part of that theoretical framework of constructivism, as kids then get to construct their knowledge and work with peers to see what's going on. And then finally, schools will want to make sure that they are investing in maintaining technology, not only for their staff, but for students as well, as a lot of learning will then take place online and through digital mediums. That'll be something that'll need to be addressed and taken care of. Right, as we wrap up the presentation, I want to thank you for watching, and really I look forward to you posting comments that I can address at a later date. Thank you.